This video is not meant for children under 13.
Once upon a time, there was a little engine called Edward. He lived in a shed with the other engines. They were all bigger than Edward and boasted about it. "The driver won't choose you again," they said. "He wants big, strong engines like us." Edward had not been out for a long time. He began to feel sad. Just then, the driver and fireman came along to start work. The driver looked at Edward. "Why are you sad?" he asked. "Would you like to come out today?" "Oh, yes, please." So the fireman lit his fire and made nice lots of steam. Then the driver pulled the lever, and Edward puffed away. And this is where it all started, with Edward.
Edward the Blue Engine is my favorite character in Thomas the Tank Engine. I mean, how could he not be? What Edward represents is so important to the show in general, because he was literally the first character created by Wilbert Awdry. That's right, not Thomas, Edward. He's one of the three main characters in the first book, and his stories are just amazing. He goes from being this little pathetic old engine who realistically should have been scrapped by now, but is still around today because he just keeps going. He gives advice to the small engines when they're in trouble. He helps push the big engines up the hill, even though they're kind of a jerk to them. He's also very kind and patient to the engines, although he's not afraid to get snappy at them when they're acting like an asshole. All these reasons combined is what makes Edward my favorite character in the show. And I try to collect every model I can of Edward because I just love him so much. So in today's video, we're not only reviewing my favorite character, but we're also reviewing one of my favorite Plarail models of all time, Edward. But I'm not doing this review alone, because today, I've asked a very good friend of mine to join me on this review. My good friend Bradley, aka Oliverfan112101.
Hey Dreamline, glad to be a part of this. And what do you know, we're reviewing a character that is easily a personal favorite of mine. I mean, it's not my personal favorite. I mean, that's Oliver if you're not surprised. But I think for Railway Series aesthetics, this one is easily my favorite of all engines, Edward. But before we get to the actual toy review, I was thinking we can go a little bit of his backstory. I mean, it is a complexity one, but I'll make it short and simple if that's okay.
Make it quick. These people got that TikTok attention span.
Alright, cue the backstory. Edward was built in 1896 as a Furness Railway K2 and worked for many years in the railway. However, in the year 1950, he arrived on Sodor along with Thomas to establish the place known as the Northwestern. And as time went on, things were going pretty well. It wasn't until when the big engines arrived, such as Henry and Gordon and a few others, that Edward became the outcast and the obsolete one. But despite this, Edward was very triumphant and hard-working, to the point where he actually succeeded himself by literally pushing a big engine that was pulling a goods train up a damn hill. That is awesome. We need more stories like that. After three railway engines, there wasn't so much that happened to Edward, but he was always there in certain moments. He was usually there in moments with characters such as James and Percy in a few stories, which I think is really nice. It wasn't until in 1954 that they finally released the first book about Edward the Blue Engine, which all the stories took place in 1952. Now this wasn't really necessarily a story about him, but stories about him doing things with others or helping out others as much as possible. With that being said, my personal favorites of these stories right there are Saved from Scrap and Old Iron. I personally don't mind the cow story. It's a pretty fun one, and at least Edward gets some fun moments, and we do get a nice birdie story, but I think what really stands out with Edward in these two are his character moments. I mean, the moment when he wanted to save Trevor from scrap is very high, and I think it's just fantastic of his character to do so. And as for Old Iron, he basically just rescued our runaway James, the one that literally degraded him. That is just awesome. But I think there's a lot more to discuss than meets the eye, right? After all that, we just go to a couple of stories where Edward's just there until we get to the best story known as Edward's Exploit. The triumphant and magnificent story where Edward became a total badass. And like that, it was perfect. Seriously, I love this book to death. I won't stop reading about it. It's just that great. Okay, I think I went a little too much of the backstory right there. Oh well, let's just move on to the toy.
Alright guys, now let's get into a good old-fashioned history lesson. In 1996, Plarail released their very first model of Edward, and it was later released to America and Britain under Tomy M Motor Road and Rail in 2001. He also came with a troublesome truck and a troublesome van. In 2003, Plarail re-released Edward, only this time they gave him a complete overhaul, painting all his details like giving him a white running board, red stripes, painted handrails, and of course a brand new painted face that looks a lot better than the old one. It really shows how much better these models can be when you paint these little details. And to me and a bunch of others, this is the definitive Edward. But you all know how the old saying goes, if it ain't broke, that means I guess you fucking ruin it. Because in 2018, Plarail again re-released Edward, and it gets my vote for being the worst model Plarail has ever made.
What the fuck, is that a fucking cat? Hey, don't fucking look at me like that. That's a weird looking fucking cat.
So I actually have a very interesting backstory about how I got my Plarail Edward. See, back in 2021 when I was recollecting Plarail items, one of the first items I really wanted to get was a Plarail Edward. But back then I had a standard, and that standard was I only collect these models brand new in box, which these days are not very easy to come by, and they're extremely hard to find for a good price. Also at the time I didn't know about the Stamplarailstore, so I couldn't just ask Stamp to help me find a model. But at the time I just gotten my first job, so I thought, I'll just work really hard and put the money towards my train collecting. So that's exactly what I did. Once my first check came in, I went on eBay and found the cheapest brand new in box Plarail model I could find, and I instantly bought it. Which you think the rest would be easy from there, right? Just wait 2 weeks for the model to arrive, then boom, you finally have a Plarail Edward, right? If only it were that easy. Because literally a couple days later, I get an email from the eBay seller saying that he had run out of Plarail Edwards.
Fuck you then, punk.
So I requested my money back and went back to looking on eBay for another Edward. And I found another one for around the same price and bought it. And so I waited another 2 weeks, and when I came home from school one day, it finally arrived. And I was so excited to open this package. But once I opened the package, my excitement turned to disappointment and then a furious rage, because the eBay seller conned me into thinking I was going to get the original Plarail Edward, and instead I got this piece of shit.
You fucking shit cunt.
So you can imagine I was beyond frustrated at this point. Not only did I not have the original 2003 Plarail Edward, but now I'm forever stuck with this piece of shit I didn't even want. So I contacted the eBay seller and told him about it, and he did give me most of my money back and allowed me to keep the Plarail Edward. Which I guess wasn't a complete loss, because I would later take that yellow van he came with and painted it brown and give it a better face. But I was still disappointed because I still don't have the Plarail Edward I want. So that means I gotta go looking for one again. So a few days later I found another Edward on eBay for a little more expensive price. But at this point I was like, oh fuck it. What do I have left to lose? But you know what they say, 3 times a charm, and like 3 days later, it finally came in the mail, and I finally had a Plarail Edward. And it only took about 10 years buying 3 different Edwards from 3 different eBay sellers and being conned into buying this piece of shit to get it. But hey, better late than never, I suppose, right? Okay guys, now that I've talked about how I obtained my Plarail Edward, I think it's about time we review the damn thing already. So let's get right into it. So here we have the Plarail Edward, and
Whoa. The original Tomy version? But wait a minute, I thought we were doing the Plarail version. You know, the one with the white lining and the silver running boards and the perfect creme of the crop details? I mean, come on, man. We can't just, like, use the original. I mean, it's just a little crappy. You know, I don't know. I just didn't like the fact it was too simplistic.
Okay, first of all, this is my YouTube channel and I'll do whatever the fuck I want. Second of all, yes, we are going to talk about the 2003 Plarail Edward, but I also want to quickly talk about the original Plarail model of Edward. Lastly, why do you have a problem with models being too simplistic? You yourself claim to be a big wooden railway fan, and those guys are simplistic as hell.
Oh, please. I mean, Wooden Railway already updated their Edward with the 2022 version and... Oh, you know what, actually, I actually take that back, because literally I sound like a hypocrite. That sucks. Ouch.
Alright then, now back to what I was saying. Yeah, I know some people probably don't care about this model because of its running board and boiler not being painted and it looking too simplistic, and the 2003 version is just god tier. But that doesn't mean this is a bad model. It's actually not that bad. And I'm pretty sure a lot of kids who grew up in the 90s and are probably adults by now probably have a lot of fond memories of this Edward. Yeah, it sucks that all this amazing detail isn't painted, but at the same time, it's a nice little beauty and simplicity thing. And back then, this is what we had to work with, and we were fine with that. As long as the engine looked like the engine from the show, that's all that mattered to us. And the rolling stock he comes with are pretty good. It's always nice to get more troublesome trucks and troublesome vans. Overall, this Edward is a very decent model, and I give it about a 7 out of 10. What about you, Bradley?
You know, I think he actually does point out a good point. I think the simplicity of the item is actually well done. And in my own opinion, this is how I kind of compare to the 2001 or the 1999 version of Edward. I'm pretty sure a lot of people either prefer the 2002, the 2013, or even the newest one that I just got on Christmas. But to be fair, I think there's just something with the charm about the older items. It's the simplicity that actually matters, and God, that face that the old Wooden Railway item has is just perfect. And it's no wonder why I bought this like a couple of years ago on eBay. I had to. I needed to. It's Edward of all characters.
Alright, now let's finally talk about the reason why you all clicked on this damn video. So here it is, the 2003 Plarail Edward. And my god, you can definitely see how much of an upgrade this is from the last Edward. Just like Plarail did with the other main 6 engines, Plarail updated Edward with a brand new painted white running board, painted red stripes, painted handrails, and a brand new painted face, which looks a lot better in my opinion. And instead of just using one giant sticker, Plarail just printed on Edward's number and lining. They even painted his back buffers both black and red. Now that is impressive. Man, I wish we can go back to this type of quality. But in terms of rolling stock, it's basically the same, except the troublesome truck is a little different. One of the things I also love about this Edward and the previous Edward is the fact they gave Edward a unique chassis that is only exclusive to him. And I also love how accurately they got his wheelbases, making Edward a true 440. I also love these side rods, which I believe are only exclusive to Edward. I don't know if the ones they use for Oliver are a little different or the same. If someone knows, let me know in the comments below, please. But not everything in this world is perfect, and I do have a couple issues with this model. The first one being is His funnel is just way too short. I don't know if you noticed this, guys, but Edward has a pretty tall funnel, but Plarail did not capture that very well. I know Plarail and Trackmaster are known for having short, stumpy funnels, which is something a lot of these models do suffer from, unfortunately. Hell, just look at Plarail Oliver. It's like, come on, you couldn't make the funnel just a little bit taller? And another problem I have with Edward is, I don't really like the face they gave Edward, to be honest. I don't know about you guys, but this Edward face just looks a little off to me. Doesn't really look like the Edward I know from the show. Nevertheless, I believe this is the definitive Edward in the motorized range, and it's definitely one of Plarail's best models. I'm going to give this Edward a 9 out of 10. What are your thoughts on it, Bradley?
Oh, now we're talking. The Plarail version made in 2003. This one is just perfect. Everything about it, it's just so gorgeous. I mean, they got the wheels right, they got the face very accurate, they just got everything so well done. And I give a lot of props to Plarail in 2003 when they updated the engines to make them so much better. I mean, it was outstanding. However, you are kind of right. The older items are actually more fun and distinct. I mean, they were made in the 90s, and a lot of people did grow up with them, so yeah, it was more of a fun time than just accurately detailed time, if you get my meaning. In all honesty, I think both items are great. I mean, it's Edward. What can I say? Do I not love him? No, I love him to death. And if I had to rank all the items, I would say this. I give the original Tomy item probably a 9 out of 10, but don't get me wrong, it's still a great and fantastic item. And probably because of my personal bias, I think I'm going to pick the Plarail one as a 10 out of 10, which I'm not surprised. But I think we can all agree with one thing. The 2018 Plarail version sucks ass, and I wish it rots in hell because this one gets a 0 out of 10. Ugh, ew, gross, no thanks. I am not getting that in my collection.
Yeah, I think it's time we finally talk about this failed abortion of a model. So let's make this quick. So I think it should be pretty obvious to you guys why this model is the biggest piece of dog shit compared to the original. But if you're too stupid to understand, then let me explain it to you. Let's start off with the obvious one, his wheelbases. You know how I praised the original for having an accurate wheelbases? Well, Plarail said fuck that and just gave Edward pretty much the same chassis almost every other Plarail engine now uses. It's like, seriously, and look at this. What is this? What is this? This is your lazy attempt to try to make Edward look like a 440? This doesn't look like Edward, this looks like James painted blue. And look at this, he has like this little lump on the side of his smoke box and boiler just so the wheels can pass through without any problems. This wasn't a problem with the other models because he had smaller wheels. And they didn't even paint the back buffers on his tender, as if this model couldn't be any lazier. Oh, also he has no wire now. He has a coupling between his cab and his tender because now the battery compartment and the motor is now in Edward's boiler, which makes him look chunky as hell. The way you access the battery compartment is that you unscrew a screw underneath and then the whole top comes off and then you pop in a AA battery. Geez, it's not like the original Plarail model had this genius design where you lift off the coal load and then just insert a C-size battery in there, and look at that. Your Edward model is ready to play. And you can very easily remove the battery without taking forever to unscrew a damn screw. If I were to throw this piece of shit a compliment, I would say the face is fine. I mean, it's pretty accurate to the CGI show. But why are his pupils so goddamn big? Who designed these pupils? He looks like a fucking alien. Fuck this model. It's a piece of shit and a complete disgrace to the original Plarail Edward. And it belongs in the fucking trash. And if you guys are going to tell me in the comments how the 2018 Edward is not that bad, then do me a huge favor and...
Fuck up, fuck up, fuck up, fuck up. Get out!
And that pretty much wraps up this review, guys. Edward is definitely one of Plarail's best models, and is definitely one of my all-time favorites. I'd say he's right next to Angry Gordon as my second favorite model. If you ever find Edward for a decent price online, trust me, you will not regret it. I definitely recommend you get him. I don't care what Mattel says, no Steam team is ever complete without having good old reliable Edward. Any final thoughts, Bradley?
Well, I think I had a fun time doing this crossover review, even though I don't really own a lot of items in Tommy and Plarail at all. But still, I think it was genuinely fun to just do this. Even though, for the most part, most of my Edward items are either Wooden Railway or have the Erdl diecast one, which is pretty awesome, by the way. But at the same time, this was just fun. Like, really fun. I can't wait to do more. Hey, if you want to, maybe we can do an Oliver review, you know, because he is my personal favorite, and we should probably do that sometime. Hopefully. Maybe. Please. I'm begging you!
Jesus Christ, calm down. And like I said earlier, this is my channel and I'll do whatever the hell I want. Although an Oliver review would not be a bad idea. Be sure to follow Bradley on Instagram. I'll have it linked in the description below. And I actually have something very special planned for the end of the video. Hope you enjoy it, guys.
On the way home, however, the weather changed. Wind and rain buffeted Edward. His sanding gear failed, and his fireman rode in front, dropping sand on the rails by hand. But there was worse to come. Before his driver could check them, his wheels slipped fiercely with a shrieking crash. Something broke and battered his frames and splashers up out of shape. The passengers gathered round while the crew inspected for the damage. Repairs took some time. "One of your crank pins broke, Edward," he said to the driver at last. "We've taken your side rods off. Now you're single, like an old-fashioned engine. Can you get these people home? They must start back tonight." "I'll try, sir," promised Edward. They backed down to where the line was more nearly leveled. Edward puffed and pulled his hardest, but his wheels kept slipping, and he just could not start the heavy train. The passengers were getting anxious. Driver, fireman, and guard went along the train, making adjustments between the coaches. "We've loosened the couplings, Edward," they said. "I can pick up your coaches one by one, just as you do with trucks." "That would be much easier," said Edward gratefully. So with the fireman standing carefully in front, the driver gently opened the regulator. "Come on," puffed Edward. He moved cautiously forward, ready to strain as his tender coupling tightened against the weight of the first coach. The first coach moving helped to start the second, and the second helped the third, and so on down the train. "I've done it! I've done it!" puffed Edward. "Steady, boy," warned his driver skippily, checking on the wheel slip. "Well done, boy. You've got them. You've got them." And he listened happily to Edward's steady beat as he forged slowly but surely up the hill. The passengers were thrilled. They waved and shouted, cheering Edward on. The Fat Controller paced the platform. Henry, with the special coach, waited anxiously. They heard a whistle. Then, battered, barely, but unbeaten, Edward steamed in. The Fat Controller stepped angrily forward. He pointed to the clock, but exciting passengers swept him aside. They cheered for Edward, his driver, and firing to the echo before rushing off to get to Henry's train. Edward went thankfully to the shed, while Duck and Bogo saw that he was left in peace. Gordon and James remained respectfully silent.